superstar English ventriloquist Paul Zerdin. Today on Ventriloquism Weekly. What a day today. Matt Bailey here, and I am very excited to bring you an interview with one of my favorite vents, Paul Zerdin. It's so exciting. I am certain most of you are familiar with his work. He has rocketed to stardom in the UK as one of their top performers. From growing up with parents that both worked for the BBC to getting the biggest laugh of the night, quote unquote, out of Queen Elizabeth and those in attendance at the 2009 Royal Variety performance. Here now, our interview with Paul Zerdin. Paul Zerdin, welcome to Ventriloquism Weekly. How are you today, sir?
I'm very good, Matt. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. So, our question that I always like to start with is, how did you get started in ventriloquism?
I began as a magician, and at probably about the age of, 6 or 7 or whatever, I was always interested in puppets and Sesame Street in particular. And then I had various sort of Muppet Sesame Street puppety characters for various birthdays and Christmas presents. And then I was about 9 or 10, I got a ventriloquist, I got a magic set, a box of tricks, and I really took to the magic. And then from that moment on, I decided I was going to be a magician. But I'd always kind of been interested in the puppets, and not particularly ventriloquism, just the Muppets in particular as puppets. And I used to do marionette puppet shows as well, for just friends and family and stuff. And then when I was about 14 or 15, I got Ray Allen's book, Got the Gear. And I kind of thought, oh, this is the ventriloquism thing. Okay, well, I'm sort of interested in it. Then I saw Ray Allen a year or so later on a Paul Daniels magic show, which was a big TV show in England, in the UK, which used to have lots of guest acts on it from all over the world. Anyway, they had Ray Allen doing his spot, and he blew me away. And I just thought, I'd seen a few ventriloquists, but technically he was the best I'd ever seen. And it kind of inspired me to learn from his book, because I just thought, wow, if that's what he can do, then this technique is the way forward. And I started practicing, and I learned how to do it. But at the time, I was still doing magic, and I was about to sort of become full-time in magic after I'd finished my exams. And I was busy working in restaurants and being one of those annoying, geeky magicians that comes up to a table with a romantic dinner for two on it and says, "Hello, would you like to pick a card?" I was doing all that kind of stuff, and then from then I got bookings as a kids entertainer. So I used to do children's parties at weekends, close-up magic at night, and then I went to see an agent, and she said, "I've got loads of magicians. They're 2 a penny. What have you got that's different?" I said, "Well, I'm learning ventriloquism," and she said, "Come back when you've got an act." And so that was what kind of really kicked me up the backside to start learning and putting it together. And I put together what I thought was a good act at the time, and she sent me out on a cruise line, Viking line, in Scandinavia for a summer.
Wow. Where
I used to have to do a family show in the afternoons, doing magic and the puppet and the ventriloquism, which I was gradually just putting in and getting confident with. And then I used to do an evening, a midnight show in the cabaret room every night as well. So I was doing an adult show and a family show all twice a day for 2 months over this summer period, and it was the best, learning experience that there could have been, really. I literally was thrust in front of a family crowd. I used to get kids up and do magic with them and start making them talk, because at the time there was a magician on television in the UK called Wayne Dobson, and he was a comedy magician, but he also used to do ventriloquism, and he was the first ventriloquist that I'd seen where he didn't use puppets, he used people from the audience. And so he would get them out of the audience as assistants or, to help with a magic trick. But he would do the voice for them when he asked them a question. And I really liked that. And I'd never seen anyone do that. And at the same time, on British television, Ron Lucas had his own show, The Ron Lucas Show. And I remember that was the first time I'd seen a ventriloquist using Muppet-type characters, as opposed to the sort of old-fashioned scary ones that kind of freak people out sometimes. And I decided at that moment I wanted to be a cross between the two. So I love doing the magic, getting people out of the audience and making them talk. And I like the Muppety type
Hmm.
um, soft figures that Ron was using. So I was a kind of a mixture of the two, influenced by both of them. And since then, Wayne has become a really good friend of mine. He's not very well. He suffers from multiple sclerosis now, but he still makes and comes up with fantastic magic ideas in well all over the world actually, especially on the convention and the lecture circuit. And he's become a good friend, and he comes up with ideas for my show sometimes. And so that anyway, that's how I started. I digress, but that's kind of how I began.
Hey, digressing is the point of this show. That's
Good.
that's
This is going to
wonderful.
work well.
It's wonderful. Now, your biography, I always do my research. Your biography mentions you getting to meet Ray Allen. Did he ever become a mentor of yours?
Well, when I was just starting out at about 15, 16, I interviewed him. He was in a local show in Wimbledon, which is where I live,
Hmm.
here in Southwest 19, where I love because at this particular time of the year, the whole world is focused on my little town here with these blokes and in white shorts and tennis rackets
Yeah.
and women as well. So there's a great buzz here at the moment. But he was doing a show at the Wimbledon Theatre, and I went along to interview him for BBC Radio, and he was very interesting. I didn't at that time. I was still kind of more into magic really, but he didn't become a friend. Some years later, I got a job as a kids presenter on breakfast television here for 2 years for Disney, and some years I had 2 years of really great experience at working and understanding how TV studios work, and that kind of helped my profile a bit, even though we were on ridiculously early in the morning. So I used to think, well, no one is watching this, but this is 20 years on, and people come up to me sometimes after gigs and say, we remember when you were the kids presenter. So it's funny, people were obviously watching, but anyway,
Yeah.
some years later I did a TV talent show on ITV. And I won this show. And the day after I won it, at the time I'd been working away, and I'd come home, and I had no money, and I was back living at home. And my mum phoned. She called upstairs. The phone went. She called upstairs, and she said, "There's a Ray Allen on the phone." And I went downstairs to the phone, and he phoned to say, "I really loved your spot on the talent show the other night. I think you've got a great character there. And I love your technique." And I said, "Well, that's down to you."
Yeah.
So I thanked him for his, brilliant technique. And then he congratulated me and just said, just try and be as original as you can. And, I'm sure you'll go a long way. So that was nice to kind of have his seal of approval.
That's wonderful, and that leads to the next thing I wanted to go into. You're known, of course, for great characters and very well done, very technically proficient. And how important you have people in this art that debate, as long as you're funny, as long as the character's good, maybe the lip control can be a little bit, or no, I'd rather you have you got to focus on technique first before character comes along. How important is technical proficiency, and where does that fall when you're learning it? Where do you put that in the scheme of things?
I think you want to be as technically good as you can. Some people are going to be better than others because I think some people find it easier. I've got to say I always found it. I found it not easy, but it sort of came to me naturally. It's like with the magic. I got quite good at it quite quickly, and it just felt very comfortable. And when I was learning the basic technique of the ventriloquism, I I look back now and think, God, I was only 15 or 16 or whatever, and I used to spend an hour a day in front of the mirror working on all the exercises that were in the Ray Allen book, and I was so determined to kind of master it. I got quite good results quickly, and that kept me going. But I think you want to be as proficient as you can. You want to be technically as good as you can be, but the most important thing is you've got to be funny. And if the show is not funny, then there's no point in my eyes. Then you just look like a strange man talking to yourself, and you're going to scare people.
Yeah, and you're not just talking to yourself. You have Sam, and you have a whole host of characters. Your most popular being Sam. Can you talk about creating him, where he came about? You see the cheeky boy throughout Vent, and when it's done excellently, and the comedian becomes well known as you have. So what is it about Sam? How did he come about, and why is he so beloved by people all over the world, and especially in England?
Um, he came about. I had another character before, which was very, very Muppety, built for me by a British puppet maker, and I did a kids show. I did my first TV spot on a kids show on BBC television when I was about 17, and I did this, used this character who I called Gus, and
Mm.
he looked very much like Ernie. He was a pinker version of Ernie from Sesame Street. Um, and I did this spot and a bit of magic with the puppet. And then I found there was a kids show, TV show, um, about to happen, and I auditioned for it, and I did the screen test with this character, and they said, we really like you, we really like what you do, but your character is too Muppet-like at the moment, and we want something along those lines, but could you come up with something else? So I went back home, and I took an electric carving knife to a big block of foam, and I carved out what is now Sam. And I've never made a puppet in my life. Maybe I'd got some glue and some felt when I was a kid and made puppets or sock puppets or whatever. But I was never into making puppets, and I was so inspired and just
Well, that's crazy because Sam looks like he was built by a professional puppet maker.
well,
That's
well,
awesome.
he is now. He is now. So I built the prototype, but I used toweling and I cut the foam out into the head shape. I hollowed it out. Um, I covered it in toweling. I got these eyes from my local department store, and I sort of slightly based him on Disney's Pinocchio, and another cartoon character. I can't remember the name of him, but the eyes and the nose, they kind of, it just sort of fitted in. And then I put some ginger hair. I thought ginger would be a bit more interesting. And I put the body together and I sewed and everything. I don't know what came over me. I was suddenly just filled with creativeness, which has never really happened since.
Sort of that magic moment, that inciting incident. So then the idea of getting a TV show then propelled you to new heights. And how important is it for ventriloquists to just find that spark?
Um, well, I mean, that was lucky, really. I mean, I auditioned. I knew I kind of got the gig, but they wanted a different character, so that just totally kind of, filled me with confidence and optimism, and I came up with this character, and then I took it to a professional puppet maker, and they built him, but rebuilt him in a way that he wasn't going to fall apart because we were doing a show every week. I created him, by chance, really. I just had some sort of image in my head, and I managed to sort of, come up with this character, which they then rebuilt. And then when the show finished, 2 years down the line, I had him rebuilt by an English puppet maker called Daryl Warby, who's done a lot of Muppet stuff, a lot of film and television, and he's a top puppet maker, and he's a good friend, and he creates and builds or helps create all my characters now.
Hmm. And you talk very highly of that Muppet style. What about it as a performer appeals to you over a hard figure?
I think just because at the time I was sort of beginning in the world of show business and ventriloquism, really and truly there hadn't been many people using the Muppet style, the soft figure, and therefore to me that just seemed logical that this was the way forward, because the amount of people that had said, "Oh, I don't like those creepy-looking old-fashioned dolls," I just thought, well, I always liked them. I found them very interesting. I like the Lenin Soul type figure, and Jeff Dunham's Walter. That's a beautiful puppet and character and creation. But at that time, 25 years ago, when I was starting out, the Muppets I just thought you could stand on stage at the Comedy Store or anywhere with a Muppet type character, and people won't, they'll give you a chance. They won't boo you off just yet. But if I'd have walked out at that time with an old-fashioned doll, it would have made life a lot harder.
Right.
So that was it just seemed absolutely logical. Having said that, my baby character is an oddballs and orphans creation, and that is a traditional doll, but there's something about it that kind of that doesn't look old fashioned.
Right. And so this idea that soft characters are more modern or more relatable than hard characters to a contemporary audience makes it something that appeals to a broader perspective then. Which is
I think so. I think things are changing now, though, because David Strassman, he used the traditional looking doll. I don't know if it was a Tim Selberg figure, but
sure.
I don't know. But anyway, it looked traditional, but his whole spin was kind of taking the piss out of it. And therefore he needed to have a scary looking creation or, something that people kind of that reminded them of the magic movies and the Dead of Night and all that kind of stuff, which is why people I think find them scary. But I like both now, and I'm working on a new idea for a character at the moment. I'm torn between going traditional and going uber latex.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting thing. Just the material um, kind of can inform character. Do you think Sam would have been different had he been a hard figure? Do you think the personality of your character would be different?
Yeah, it's funny how I don't know why. Um, this is going to sound really odd, but my technique, my lip technique, my lip control, to me somehow feels better when operating a traditional vent figure.
Hmm.
Now, I have no idea why that would be. That's just me being a bit mental. But um, when I'm doing my baby character, I feel like my technique is at its best than when I'm doing one of my soft figures like Sam. It's a weird thing. I don't know why that is. I can't tell you why. It feels very, very comfortable.
I
But
I had the same thing. I use a few characters in my show, and when I get to the one I have the longest and most set routine with, this is a bit more second nature. The lip control is just a bit more second nature to me, so that makes total sense. And but in terms of actual character of Sam, the look of Sam being that Muppety look, do you think he'd have a different personality if he were a hard figure?
yeah, possibly, yeah, because you've got, I was very, very, very influenced by the Muppet characters and the way their personalities, and so there was a lot of character stuff just that came automatically, just with having a big mouth. So you've got the instant laughter, you've got something laughing, and that gives it some attitude. And then you've got the way they kind of there's lots of double takes and things that go on with a big head, which you couldn't get quite the same with a traditional head.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's definitely it's influenced it, and it would have been very different, I'm sure. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. It's quite a nice idea actually about him regressing and going back to what he was or what he could have been in another life or something. I don't know. It's just I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, I find it the idea of the look informing the character because a lot of times you get the idea for the character in your head, um, and then you find the puppet that fits it because that's the idea to go about to make sure you're not wasting the money on the $300 $600 puppet. But then sometimes you come across this puppet and you're just like, I have to have it because or I have this style in mind and it informs the character. The idea of having both sides is very interesting and it's just a very interesting aesthetic to ventriloquism.
Yeah, yeah.
And so your show, I was again reading on the website about how all the characters interact, have certain things that they desire for, and they fit within your show. How important is it to have a cohesive show with the characters and have them all mesh together, if not necessarily interact, but mesh together to create a show?
Um, I'm not sure how. I don't know if it is that important. It seems to have been something that evolves in my show. They are kind of all related, and I guess a little backstory can help. People, it's nice to have a bit of history, and if you have a slight history or you know their history, then I think it maybe helps you understand the character more. I'm not one for going into in-depth character analysis and breakdowns, but if you know that they're related in some way, then that can help. And the way that my live show has kind of evolved has been, it seems to be that I'm almost the babysitter. And I've got to look after a baby who wants to be breastfed by a woman in the front row and is just getting slightly out of hand and is being kind of led astray by his older brother, who is Sam, and then there's the granddad, who's kind of, in a way, the granddad and the baby are quite similar, because they're both, he's losing his control of bodily functions and the baby's just learning how to use them.
Yeah.
And so there are similarities, and you've got this kind of one man. This is how I say it in interviews quite a lot. It's like a one man stand up sitcom.
Sure.
So that I'm kind of in the middle of it all and trying to keep the peace and pacify the baby and try and sort of steer them all in the right direction. And there's chaos that ensues as a result. So that seems to be the way that it's worked, rather than just a bloke standing there with a variety of puppets just doing jokes. It's nice if there is some sort of reason for you being there, even though at the end of the day, that is what I'm doing. I'm standing there doing gags with puppets and without the puppets when I'm doing the stand-up stuff. So, but it gives it a little bit more, I think it makes it a bit more interesting if there is a bit of a, I'm not saying there's any major storyline here, but if there's a little kind of thread or something that links it all together, I think it makes for a better show.
Yeah, just a small through line to kind of make it, to kind of glue it together. And that leads to this idea that you are one of the freshest voices in ventriloquism, one of the most well-known comics in England. So how can we all freshen up our act so that it isn't, I don't want to say that stale, that doing something that's older is stale, because the idea of going back to classics is good, but how can we all be fresh? What do you think of when you're writing comedy for ventriloquism, this older art form? How can we all freshen it up? What would you say to that?
That's a really good question, and I don't really know what the answer is, to be honest. I always just try and, when I started out, I used to watch as many performers as possible and ventriloquist performers. And I remember going to the Vent Haven convention for the first time, and I was doing a small documentary or a report for the breakfast TV channel that I was working on at the time. So I got to interview, people like Jeff and various other people. Sorry, I can't remember the question. What was the question?
Just how can we all make our act more modern, more fresh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. The material. Yeah. Sorry. Material. I was working very late last night at a festival, and so I'm still a bit kind of. So I apologise for my brain fart.
No, it's fine. You're good.
So the material. I think when you start out, you're influenced by watching other people, and people copy things. There was a talent show recently on television, and there was a young ventriloquist doing, stuff, material that I recognised from my act. But he was starting out, and there were some very negative comments on Twitter, on my Twitter and Facebook, saying, "I can't believe he's ripped your act off, blah, blah, blah." But I thought, actually, when everyone starts out, they are influenced by various people, and people do nick gags and nick routines and ideas and stuff. And I think that's kind of the way it is. But then, really and truly, eventually you find your own feet, and you develop your own style, and because of that you finding your own original style, then the material kind of comes out of that. I do a lot of people watching, and I particularly like when I'm working with my baby character. I've got a 3-year-old, nearly 4-year-old nephew now, and I like playing games with him, and verbal games, and just winding him up and messing around with him and seeing what comes out of it. And quite a lot of material for my baby has come from that, and it tends to be from sort of real life observations. The same goes with kids. There's a routine that I do with Sam, which I've been doing for quite a long time, where he copies me and he copies everything I say. And that's something I used to do as a kid. And I've seen kids do it, in a playground or whatever. It's something that everyone does. And some a good idea because this is something that everyone can relate to. They either did it as a kid or their parents that their kids do it to them all the time and it drives them nuts. So I thought that would be a really nice thing to do, and it's just one of those things that you can keep on doing because kids do that. So I think the material probably is best if it comes from real life. I remember seeing Jeff Dunham do a show in Vegas as part of the Ventriloquist Vegas convention. And I think he did a whole routine with Peanut about being stopped for speeding and driving too fast. And I remember watching, it was the first time I'd seen a ventriloquist kind of doing stand-up rather than just, ventriloquist setup, puppet, punchline. Which is kind of how it used to be. And he was the first person I saw doing more observational comedy with the puppet, kind of winding him up and pointing out what he'd done wrong, speeding. And I'm sure it was him. It's a long time ago. And that made me think, oh, wow, you can look at it and go down so many different routes. And having worked on the comedy circuit for so long now and at the Comedy Store here in London, watching, you are watching great comedians all the time, and so you can start thinking about other things and developing different.
I'm here.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. It just turned off the video. I don't.
Oh, okay. So with the new show, I'm working on some slightly longer routines.
Yeah.
Where it's not just joke punchline. It's there's more to it than that, and that's sort of a bit more conversational. And I think probably maybe that's the way to go, depending on what your character is really, and what else you're doing in your show. But that's the way I'm sort of going.
Absolutely. And that leads into our final question. I always end with this. What do you want to see from ventriloquists coming up? What's missing? What would you like to see somebody do in this art form?
What would I like to see someone do? Well, I'd like to see me do it first of all. And well, I've developed a new mask, moving mouth, where I'm not touching them, but I'm still controlling them, and I get them to do all sorts of things on stage, and I'm really pushing that and seeing how far I can go with that. I'm using some magic in the show this year, but in a ventriloquial way. So I'm getting people to do it from the audience that I'm controlling to do all sorts of stuff. It's like being a hypnotist in a way. I'm just constantly trying to see where you can go with it, how far, and I think you are limited only by your imagination. So I had a great show last night. I tried out a whole new section, and it worked really well. And I was driving home, and I needed to write down stuff, because I was so inspired by it all. So I don't know where it's going, but I don't see why it would stop anywhere in particular. I think I remember being in a meeting with a TV executive a few years ago, and I was talking about doing my own show, and they said to me, "We've all seen puppets. We don't want that. We love ventriloquism. We want to see you doing ventriloquism without puppets," which is why I started to develop stand-up using ventriloquism, which is not a new idea. Other people have done it, obviously. And I started doing the sound check microphone out of sync and talking about using ventriloquism in everyday life, which a lot of other ventriloquists do. It's common ground, and it's logical. It makes absolute sense to go that way because it's doing stand-up, but you're still using your skill. So I think trying to push that it will be interesting, and I think that's definitely something I'm going to explore. more. And I think, thanks to people like Jeff Dunham and Terry Fator, ventriloquism now it's really cool. I just got a review from a show last night, and it said something like super cool ventriloquist, Paul Zerdin. I thought that's and a few years ago they would never have said that. But now, because there's a lot of ventriloquism around, Nina Conti is doing really well in this country as well. Jeff has gone global. Ventriloquism is really cool now, and we're not freaks like we used to be.
Right.
So I think, anything is possible, and I think there will be more. I think there's going to be more on television, and I think that's kind of good for everyone.
Certainly, and it's a really good time to be a ventriloquist, and it's a really good time to talk to Paul Zerdin. Thank you very much for being with us today.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you again to Paul for Skyping in from England. Such a treat to talk to you. And thank you, listeners. It's been another fun month of shows, but the summer is over and I head back to NYC. And you know that we kick it up a few notches once we are in the Big Apple. Never know what to expect from week to week. You don't and I don't, and I'm the host. Like I said last year, it should just be a week till we're up and running again. I am living with 3 roommates this year in one room. No apartment, nothing like that. It's a dorm. So if anything changes on this prediction of just 1 week off, I will let you know, as I always do. Either way, we will be talking very soon. A reminder, you can find all you need to know about Ventriloquism Weekly by visiting our website, ventriloquismweekly.com. That is the mothership. Reach out by emailing ventriloquismweekly@gmail.com. Find our group on Facebook by searching no, don't search. Going to change this. I did a URL thing. You can go on now and you can do facebook.com/groups/Ventriloquism Weekly. Or you can search on Facebook Ventriloquism Weekly -podcast for ventriloquists. Tweet us at Talk4Two and spell it out TALKFORTWO. Use hashtag Talk4Two. Spell it the same, please. I cannot wait till we are back in 2 weeks. Signing off for Ventriloquism Weekly, I'm Matt Bailey, reminding all you vents out there to keep talking for two.